I immediately started networking and building up mentoring relationships and just learning from others who had gone before me and absorbing as much information as humanly possible before diving in. And then in May of that year, I opened the proverbial doors to my law firm.
You're listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with your host, Michael Palmer. Listen each week as inspiring guests share their secrets of success to help you increase your confidence, work smarter, and build a business you love. This episode of The Successful Bookkeeper is brought to you by PureBookkeeping.com, the proven system to grow your bookkeeping business.
Welcome back to the Successful Bookkeeper Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Palmer, and today's show is going to be a very good one. Our guest is the owner of her own law firm based in Oklahoma, where she helps entrepreneurs with their legal needs. Paige Hulse, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to talk to you today.
That's great to have you, and I'm excited to hear about everything legal-wise for the bookkeeping industry, but as well about your perspective on business, being an entrepreneur and business owner yourself. So before we get into all of that, Paige, please tell us a little bit about your career journey leading up to this point.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Like you said, my name is Paige Hulse, and I own I got very creative with naming my law firm, Paige Hulse Law, based out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Backing up before I started my law firm, I graduated from law school and jumped straight into the world of litigation. Like you mentioned, I'm from Oklahoma, and as many people are probably aware, the oil and gas industry is huge down here. So upon graduating from law school, I graduated in the middle of one of the largest recessions in the oil and gas industry, which was 2015, and got one of the only available jobs as a litigator in the oil and gas industry. The reason why that's relevant to what I do today is that industry primarily deals with contracts, contract disputes, issues of that nature. And that first job that I had was one of those, looking back, I'm so grateful I could not have had a better job to prepare me to be a law firm owner. But it was absolutely a trial by fire experience. I was in court almost immediately upon getting my job, and was leading up federal cases within the first year. So it was a grueling year and a half that I was there, 2 years that I was there. But I think I probably learned 5 years worth of information about actually the practice of law within that time frame. To counterbalance the stress of being in the courtroom all the time and just the demands of the job, I picked up what seemed like a kind of odd habit at the time, but I would come home at night and I would just need a creative outlet, just something, again, to counterbalance arguing with people all day. And so I discovered calligraphy and got into a habit of, as obscure as it sounds, coming home and just sitting down and doing calligraphy for a couple hours just to literally unwind and kind of, stop my brain from just going and going and going. One thing led to another. And at that time in my life, most of us have been in this situation before. I think just about everyone I knew was getting married. And so that little creative outlet accidentally turned into a side business. And I started just I would calligraph wedding invitations and things like that for friends' weddings, et cetera, et cetera. So that was my introduction into entrepreneurship. And again, that happened very organically and without any planning, to be quite frank. The more that I did that, the more I examined my career path and the way that I was practicing law. And what had drawn me to the oil and gas industry originally is I come from a family of entrepreneurs. One family member has his own oil and gas company that he started from literally nothing but just grit and gumption. And I realized that the reason why I had been drawn to that industry is because there are so many entrepreneurs, and the clients that I really loved and had a passion for working with were the business owners and were the entrepreneurs. And then on the personal side as well, as I was growing this little side business, as it now was, I was becoming more and more aware of the creative and just online entrepreneur, online small business market that there is. And the fact that I wasn't seeing a lot of sound legal decisions being made. So all that to say, in 2017, I decided to take the leap and start my own law firm, working, like you said, just working with entrepreneurs and we can get into it, but everything from contracts to trademarks and estate planning. So it has been a wild ride for sure.
We'll get back to the interview right after this word from our sponsor. Is this the year you go from accountant or bookkeeper to people advisor? Gusto is on a mission to give every accountant and bookkeeper the skills and resources they need to support their clients well beyond their finances. Sure, Gusto provides an incredibly easy-to-use modern payroll system, but on top of that, you can offer integrated benefits, hiring and onboarding tools, performance management, time tracking, and so much more. And if you're saying, but I'm not qualified to talk about benefits, or I don't know how to provide HR support, Gusto offers certified people advisory training along with CPE credits for free. There's even an accelerator program that teaches you how to package and monetize these new services so you can grow your firm and increase your revenue. And get this, Gusto is so sure you're going to love their platform, they'll set you up with free payroll and HR for your own firm. Sign up today and get client HR tools, exclusive discounts, plus free payroll for your firm by going to gusto.com/The Successful Bookkeeper. That's gusto.com/The Successful Bookkeeper. Thank you for hearing from our sponsor. Now let's get back to the interview. Such an interesting journey and the parallel between the work you do all day and then coming home and doing something very creative leading into your own journey into being an entrepreneur. And you grew up around entrepreneurs. And I'm curious, like that tipping point of going into business for yourself, what made that the time that you said, I'm going to do this now and go into business for myself?
That I'm glad you asked that question. I don't get asked that question very much. And I'll just shoot you very straight here. After a full year, a year and a half of practicing at that firm, I enjoyed the work. I was challenged by the work, but I just had that kind of nagging, like that nudge. We all have that moment of intuition at some point in our lives where we just kind of feel like there's like a little piece of curiosity it keeps pulling us a certain direction. And I just had that feeling for a few months. And I was driving to a deposition. This happened, I think, in a very unique way because it happened in a split second for me. I was driving to a deposition in late January of 2017 in the absolute backwoods of my state, Oklahoma. It was quite a ways away. And I was listening to an audiobook, and something that author said in that audiobook, and the quote was something, I don't want to butcher the quote too much. It was a book by John Mark Comer. And the quote was something to the extent of, sometimes the calling is staring you in the face. You just have to look at it, essentially. Something that's a paraphrased version of the quote. I remember the exact mile marker that I was at, and it just hit me like a lightning bolt. That nagging feeling I had was I wanted to take my vocation, which is the practice of law, and I wanted to blend it together with that drive for entrepreneurship that was just innate within me. And to your point, growing up, I'm extremely blessed to have grown up around entrepreneurs, very literally, with the exception of a couple of family members that are in healthcare. Every single person in my family, including grandparents on both sides, and even my husband's family as well, they're all business owners. So it was just something I was raised with, and that mentality that I was raised with raised around. And I guess I had just adopted as my own without even realizing it at first until, like I said, that I call it that lightning bolt moment. So from that occurred in late January, I kind of sat on it quietly for a couple months and I know that no one ever tells somebody they can just start a business. But when you're in law school, they terrify you when it comes to the concept of starting your own law firm. It feels like a very unattainable goal. So I had to kind of separate out the ghosts of what I was afraid of when it came to starting my own firm. I had to separate between that and the actual reality and the facts of what it would take. And if this was something that I was not just capable of doing, but capable of doing so successfully without harming my family's income and just my family's future. So I sat on it I had to weigh the emotional and the logical is really what I'm getting at there. Just like we all do at some point in our lives. I sat on that from about late January until mid-March. And then I very nervously told my husband in March that I had this crazy idea that I had wanted to start a law firm. And that sweet man, we got married a couple days after I passed the bar exam. So we were still newlyweds pretty much at the time. He, for some reason, I don't question it too much, but for some reason he said, you can do anything you set your mind to. I know that you'll be successful. Go for it. So once I had that support, the wheels went into motion. And from March until May, I reached out to, and I can get into this much more later on because I think this is one of the most important things anyone can do when starting a business. I immediately started networking and building up mentoring relationships and just learning from others who had gone before me and absorbing as much information as humanly possible before diving in. And then in May of that year, I opened the proverbial doors to my law firm.
Wow. So big obstacle sounds like it was the doubt that was built into your mind from law school around opening your own firm. And that can be a big one. And every entrepreneur, I think, is faced with the doubt. People, family, friends, you were fortunate that your family supported you. Many don't.
Absolutely.
Because they don't want people to fail. Nobody wants their friends and family to fail. And a lot of people do fail. It's risky. It's, you're going, our listener knows, it's going the uncharted road, like to own your own business and start your own business from nothing. There's a lot of obstacles. That was one for you. You had support. What other obstacles did you face in growing like your business? Are you probably have your superpowers, which you're really good at, but then you have those not so superpowers.
I will.
I don't know what they don't call. What's the opposite of superpowers? Your weaknesses.
Yeah, there we go.
Your kryptonite.
Yeah, I do have a couple. Yeah, one or two Achilles heels, I guess you could say. And I'm laughing because of the audience of this podcast and the subject matter of this podcast. If I'm being very honest, the very kind husband that I mentioned is also a financial advisor, and he would immediately tell you that I am very bad when it comes to the number side of my business. I'm all about
Perfect. Our audience loves to hear that.
I know. I set myself up for it too, but I have to I'll throw myself under the bus and be honest. But yeah, that's definitely something. And again, just to be completely honest about it, you can have all the knowledge in the world. And again, I know that people know this, but you can have all the knowledge in the world. You can be told the right steps to take, but you have to follow that up with choosing to take the appropriate action to accompany it. So for the first year or two, I was very blessed in that the businesses took off, but the first year or two were very rocky in terms of figuring out that push and pull that is required to market and then also, run your own business as well as perform your skill set, your vocation, which for me obviously is the practice of law, but running the back end side of business too. Looking back, and now when I work with new startups, I'm quick to share this story, but when you're starting out, if you're doing it correctly, I would argue that you should be spending a third of your time on on each of those tasks, roughly, and that can shift as obviously. I made the mistake of thinking that I could do everything. So, 40% or 40 hours a week would be spent on the practice of law, 40 hours a week would be spent on the admin side or the marketing side. And then you run out of hours eventually. So all that to say, it took a couple years of figuring out how to balance being a business owner with being a lawyer, blending the two without driving myself into the ground at the same time.
That is a tough one, and our listener would relate to that as well.
Yeah.
As you came in as a technician, a lawyer, and you need to find time to be the entrepreneur and to be the manager as well. And that's out of E-Myth, the book by Michael E. Gerber.
Great book,
about building systems. Yes, definitely. So you've read the E-Myth. I
have, and really my again, not to throw myself under the bus too much here. My problem is that I excel in the visionary aspect, and reaching that point, which every entrepreneur has to figure this out, but you can't start out and just sit in one, just be the visionary. You do have to employ the technician and the manager, like you were mentioning, those roles as well. Because, when you don't have the startup to hire a full team, you have to build your way to get there. So yeah, great book. I recommend that to all of my clients that are starting their own businesses.
Very cool. So you figured it out, though. You got through it. What was it that had you get through those initial challenging times in your business?
I like to say that, it is the truth. I have the unique blessing of sitting in, I have a bird's eye view of entrepreneurship. I feel like people are coming to me to start, run, or shut down or sell businesses. So consistently learning, I never stop learning. My goal is to never be so proud that I think that I can stop learning. Never let that ego get in the way. I got to work with some incredible, and I still do, of course, but in those early years, some incredible entrepreneurs, as well as some that were struggling. And I got to kind of start to see the patterns between those who were struggling, those who were successful, and essentially created my own action plan of what to do and what not to do. Very
cool. Very cool. It's interesting having you on the show talking about this, because we often talk about who has the view of the entrepreneur's journey, and accountants do when it comes to financials, but you as well. Like, I'm just curious what your view is on. Many entrepreneurs would say the same thing you did, which is the financial aspect is not one of your superpowers or probably your enjoyable things. Like, you would rather probably go home and do some calligraphy than figure out where to put the receipts and all that good stuff and get your financials in order. What's the view that you have around your clients' conditions of their financials?
I see this come up most prominently when I'm helping people buy and sell businesses or buy and sell portions of their business. For example, if somebody starts up an education side to their service-based business and sells the online course, whatever that might be, then the question becomes, how do you put a dollar amount on what the business is worth? I see it come up in a couple ways, but this is the biggest one. If the business owner has shirked those responsibilities for, an extended period of time or habitually, it becomes troublesome when we're trying to determine a valuation of the business and we're trying to negotiate that LOI in those initial steps. Aside from the purchase and sale of businesses on a more everyday level, I guess you could say, this was particularly relevant in 2020 with COVID. But whenever I am assisting clients with negotiations, with the goal being that we stay out of court, but unfortunately, sometimes we do wind up in court. When we wind up in court and we are trying to figure out what damages actually are, especially, again, when I'm working with service-based business owners, judges, you're going to have to convince a judge what you're worth. So, for example, I work with a lot of wedding professionals. COVID I don't need to explain how bad COVID was for the wedding industry. I can't tell you how many times I was in court, or actually at Zoom court, which is very odd, but how often I was in Zoom court having to defend my clients and their payment structures. And if the clients did lose the case, the judge would look straight at my client and say, defend your payment plan or defend your pay. So for example, quite a few people, and I'm kind of getting on a bit of a rabbit trail. I'll come back.
Love it. Oh, it's a great rabbit trail that I think our listener is loving. So
it's relevant, I promise.
It really is. I can tell.
Yeah. So for a lot of service providers, and especially I use the example of the wedding industry because those contracts extend over a long period of time. Usually someone hires let's say a wedding photographer 6 months to a year before the actual event. If you're in court defending your wedding photography services payment plan and payment structure, a judge is going to look you in the eye and they're going to ask you, and they're not going to ask, they're going to tell you to tell them why you were able to charge a 50% deposit up front, for example, when you haven't even shown up. The wedding hasn't occurred yet. You haven't done 50% of the work. And I have this conversation nearly daily, because my clients will say, well, I can't put in dollar amount on what it takes to prepare my business for the wedding day. And I have to gently but firmly push back and say, yes, you can. And you have to get out an Excel spreadsheet or open an Excel spreadsheet and start typing in those business expenses, what it takes to literally to keep that business up and running. Because even if you aren't showing up until the wedding day, we both know that you have to pay certain bills to keep the proverbial lights on in order to keep the business running. You have contractors you're usually paying. If it's a film photographer, you have costs in regards to the actual film. I get very, 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 very detailed when it comes to those damages negotiations like that. Yeah, and if clients aren't able to actually put pen to paper and show at least some semblance of logic as to why they charged what they charged when they charged it, their case, they're up a creek without a paddle. It's bad every single time.
So interesting. And another angle for our listener to obviously it's not one of the things you're going to say to people, hey, if you ever get sued or want to sue somebody, you're going to need to have the bookkeeping in order, get your financials straight.
But that's a good way to put it.
There's many reasons. And unfortunately it's nobody wants to have to prepare, and it's like insurance. Do you want to buy insurance? Who wants to spend money on insurance? But you sure like it when you have it. But it's always nice to see the perspective from someone like yourself who has different eyes on it, and you see a lot of those things happening. How did you deal with the bookkeeping in your business?
That was looking back. Well, so first of all, I hid my head in the sand for the first year. Don't recommend that.
Many do.
Yeah, I know I'm not alone, but I hope that anyone listening can learn from my mistakes there. Once I actually faced the facts, that was the first thing that I hired out, or that I outsourced, I should say. And again, my husband being in the finance realm, he's been able to be very helpful with just telling me, what I need to do, what I need to be looking at, what I need to be tracking, and how do you actually track whether or not your business is healthy or not. You have to have a metric to base that off of, to then strategically plan out your next steps, obviously. Once I saw it from that perspective, because if you can convince me that we can employ strategy, then I'm game, and I'm willing to play with it. Once I started looking at it from that perspective, again, being able to take my visionary self and recognize that in order to be a visionary, I have to have these building blocks in place. That's when I finally started to just make it a part of my everyday routine. So aside from just actually starting to do my own bookkeeping there at first, it only took, if I remember correctly, maybe a month or two of me doing that before I realized that that's not what I need to be doing at midnight after I finish client work. B, that leaves less of my brain power for my clients next day. And much like an athlete, my brain is a muscle and I have to show up and use that muscle to perform for my clients every day. And C, somebody else can do it probably 10 times faster and can, and probably with fewer mistakes as well. And if they do their job well, in my opinion, and I don't know if this is a controversial opinion or not, but if they do their job well, they save me money in the process, because my time is money, and my time is better spent on practicing law. So that was, again, the first thing I outsourced, and the person that helps me with that to this day. It's been a great story, and it's something that I would imagine a few audience members may be able to relate to as well. But the person that I outsourced bookkeeping to, her business has flourished over the years as well. And she's become an integral part of my business and operates as my COO today. So she was able to take the opportunity, or if we call it the opportunity, to assist with the bookkeeping side, and really, build I'm very proud of the business that she's built. But I'll step off that soapbox.
Let's get her on the podcast. Love to hear that story.
She's wonderful. Yeah, she's wonderful. Beautiful.
Well, it's a great story, because we'd love to, I'm sure our listener would love to take you along to all of the sales calls and just listen to her. It's like, stop trying to do this yourself. Your time's worth what it's worth. You have your superpowers. You're a lawyer. You have no business doing financial work at all in your business, other than being told what's, the high level stuff, right? It's
exactly.
Like, these are the stuff that you need to know to make decisions and better run your business. And your bookkeeper has grown and expanded that, by the sounds of it, into more advisory work and helping you. Literally, your chief operating officer, that's incredibly valuable to you and to your business. Your business is thriving. Their businesses, or her business, is thriving. So it's a beautiful story, and it's one that that's what we want to hear. That's what we want to see. We'd love to get you there faster. You came along quite quickly, actually. Some wait years and wait till it's an incredible mess before they get the help. And some never get there, and some never get to that value point of understanding the value of being able to have things done correctly and have the information you need to make those decisions.
Absolutely.
So I really love that story.
Thank you.
And so it's just nice to get the perspective of both someone who's in growing their business, but at the same time, ideally, the customer of many of our. You're the customer. You're the voice of the customer of our listeners, right?
Absolutely. As you were talking, one note that came to mind that I think as well is relevant as well. Again, coming from the perspective of a customer and an attorney, I am intimately aware with the legal concept of piercing the corporate veil, which may pertain more so just in the United States than around the world. But just to very quickly simplify that concept, I've litigated both sides of it, where somebody has an LLC and we're trying to, if I'm prosecuting it, trying to prove that they don't run their business like a business, or vice versa, defending it, trying to prove that they do in fact run their business as a business. Piercing the corporate veil is when an attorney is able to prove that even though the person calls it a business, the law shouldn't give it that legal protection, the liability protection of being an LLC or of a corporation. The number one way that an attorney can pierce the corporate veil of a business is to prove commingling of funds. And commingling of funds can get that's a nuanced concept that lawyers can wax poetic on that for hours and hours, very literally. But I knew the law behind that. I knew that how important it was to separate out I had my business finances separated, but I knew how important it was to make sure that my business's money was treated as my business's money, not my money, until it was handled properly. Again, just because I had the I guess we can call it the advantage of having seen this play out in the courtroom several times. So that was why, even though it wasn't fun to outsource at first, it was just too important not to.
Another great value point for our listener to understand, the impacts of not getting it done right for their clients.
Absolutely.
And, it's not that people think about these things often, the consequences, but that's part of the story our listener needs to tell to their clients. And there's been a few good stories for them to tell their clients around the value of having it done correctly to protect themselves, to be able to be in a position where they can get to the business that they dream of, right? It's
Absolutely.
That's all part and parcel of getting them there. It's like knowing the risks. If you're trying to get somewhere, like, know that you have a potential to go in the ditch here. And so let's keep you out of the ditches and keep you straight on that road going towards your dream business. And so I love that perspective that you've brought, not only from yourself as a business owner, but the legality of it in court, defending their business, defending their services to potential lawsuits.
Yeah. Thank you.
So maybe where I was going to actually go a little bit here is into, with regard to their own business and the legal aspects that they would need to take into consideration for their businesses. What are some of the things that you would advise one of our listeners that are bookkeeping business owners, they're starting the business, they're in the business, from a legal perspective, what are some of the things they should be paying attention to?
So I'm going to break this into 3 specific action steps for anybody listening. So the first, we always start with the foundation. I always want to point to ensuring that whether or not you're starting your business or you've had your business you're in the midst of running your business, the foundation, your legal entity, needs to be in place. So speaking from the perspective of an attorney licensed in the United States, that means typically that you want to look at forming an LLC. Because you want to separate your business assets and liability from your personal assets and liability. I know that around the world, that same concept, legal concept, just has slightly different names. So it may differ slightly wherever you're located. However, ensuring that you have some sort of entity in place that separates, again, your personal liability and assets from your business liability and assets. A quick example of this would be, people obviously think of, if your business gets sued, that means that you don't want your personal assets to be on the line, which is very, very true. On the flip side, if you got sued in your personal life, you don't want your business to be on the line if you are in trouble in that way. When I talk to clients about this, they usually look at me, and what they're thinking is, well, I'm not going to get sued. I'm not going to break the law. I'm not going to go commit a crime. But think of how frequently things like car accidents happen. And again, I know this isn't the most pleasant thing to talk about, but if you're in a car accident and it is deemed to be your fault, insurance is probably going to be involved, which means that lawyers are probably going to be involved, and they're probably going to be an attorney's job is to work in the best interest of their client. So that means whenever an attorney sues somebody, they need to recoup as much money as they can for their client. So if we're using the example of even just a fender bender, but you get sued because of the damage to the other vehicle, that attorney is going to be looking at you, everything that you own, and seeing how much they can get from you. And in those types of cases, you don't want your business you don't want to wipe out your business bank account and set your business back to satisfy a judgment. So step number 1, make sure that your legal, your foundation is in place. You have an entity in place, an appropriate entity. The second concept is going to be, or not concept, but the second step that I want anyone listening to be aware of is contractual considerations. Please, especially when it comes to bookkeepers, you're providing a professional service for your clients, and that is incredibly important to remember. You're not just a service provider, you are providing a professional service. Do not use a free contract from the internet for so many reasons, but 1, it's going to show. 2, it's going to look cheap. 3, it's probably not going to hold up, and it's probably going to land you in more hot water than if you hadn't used it at all. And I can get into that more, but if it's not readily apparent, I do have an opinion when it comes to professional service providers. We have to hold ourselves to a high standard to meet that bar of being professionals. So ensuring that your client contract is not just set up properly, but is also a document that's going to protect both parties is critically important. And this is where I differ from a lot of attorneys probably, but ensuring that the contract is something that your client can actually read. It doesn't need to be pages and pages of legalese. We can translate it into at least some plain English so that your client can understand it, but just managing those client expectations from the get-go. So again, plenty more to say there, but I'll go on to the third thing that I want anyone listening to think about. You need to, if you have a business with a name that is anything other than your last name, you need to have a trademark, a federal trademark for that business name. And that can also include your logo and your slogan as well. But start with your business name. The reason for this is until you trademark the business name, you don't actually own it. The question then becomes, well, why do I care if I own my business name or not? In the United States, and this also applies around the world as well, if somebody decides that your business name is clever and they might want to use it themselves, they can go file a trademark for your business name before you do. And it's a race to the courthouse system in the US. And so that means that their application would get heard before yours, or adjudicated upon before yours. And if that application becomes a registered trademark, they would be able to force you to change your business name. That's going to carry implications when it comes to rebranding your business, rebuilding up a new brand identity, but it also can carry liability because in those settlement agreements, they are so tricky to negotiate because if they do try to pursue any legal action against you for using a name that is too similar to their registered trademark, many times in those contracts or in those settlement agreements, I see language to the effect of, you have until a certain date to stop using the business name in any form whatsoever, including anywhere on the web, on the World Wide Web. Well, that's nearly impossible, nearly impossible to control, especially if we're marketing online, especially in today's age. It's just nearly impossible. And most of the times, especially when it comes to small businesses, most of the time that language is included, it is for the purpose of setting you up for failure so that you have to pay a penalty fee at the end of the day. I don't share that, again, to be scary, but that's just something that people need to be aware of. That is something that I saw with, I don't know the exact, I think we tracked a 300 and some percent increase in those cases in 2020 and thereafter as businesses were slowing down. I call it legal extortion, but bigger businesses were going after smaller businesses and putting them in those positions where they had to sign those settlement agreements that essentially set them up for failure. And then they had to pay just a small fee of, $50,000 a year to continue using the name or something crazy like that. It was literally a way for those businesses to make money. So all of that to say, trademarking is something that needs to be on every single person's radar that is listening.
Wow. Those are some simple things that many would not think about, but when you lay it out, the consequences, it's really a little bit of effort leads to a heck of a lot less pain and suffering in the future.
Exactly.
Wow. This has been, we could probably go on further and further. I love the stories of you and your perspective on the law, and as well from a perspective of a business owner like yourself, having been there. I know our listener respects that and has likely gotten a lot out of this conversation. Anything else to add to this conversation before we wrap up this episode?
Just one small note that I was thinking of as we were about to hop on the call and looking back at just the concerns that I had when I was first starting to outsource the bookkeeping side of my business, and the concerns that I know when my clients come to me for referrals, which is pretty common for bookkeeping, the concerns that they express that, again, I know that our listener would be aware of, but just as a gentle reminder, ensuring that your client contract covers confidentiality in very explicit terms, because when it comes to the money side of businesses, and again, I know that everyone listening knows this, but when it comes to the money side, that's a very sensitive and can be a very emotional side of the business for people. And they want to feel confident knowing that what they share with you is not going to be shared anywhere else. So making sure that you, again, manage those client expectations, have that explicitly stated in the contract, and then reiterate it in your client communication as well, I think would be just a useful note to end on.
Yeah, and something to really highlight in the conversation with them when our listeners getting started. It can be I think a big relief for people to just have that be addressed.
Exactly.
It's one thing to say, and we have full confidentiality, but to lay it out just as you have puts people at ease. It's like, this is sensitive to you. It's like calling out the elephant in the room. This is
exactly
likely sensitive to you. It's very important to you. It's very important that this is confidential to you, and want you to know that this is laid out in our agreement, and anything that we talk about is confidential.
Exactly.
It won't be shared. No one else will know. It's just between you and I and this business. So I love that. It's a great thought and note that not only is important from a legal standpoint, but also from a making people feel at ease standpoint.
Absolutely.
Paige, this has been absolutely fantastic. On behalf of our listener, I want to thank you for your generosity in coming on the show and sharing your story, but also sharing some really valuable information about what all of us need to be thinking about in our businesses.
Thank you so much for having me. This has really been great speaking with you, and I appreciate you having me.
Paige, if people wanted to get in touch with you or actually hire you to be their lawyer, where would they go to do that?
So if you are looking for trademark assistance, or if you're located in the United States looking for any business assistance, you can find me at paigehulse.com, my law firm, Paige Hulse Law. If you are looking for contracts, then I have a second business that I didn't really mention, but every contract that I have written, I have converted into a template, and that is available at the Creative Law Shop, which is shopcreativelaw.com. Everything from the contracts that I've written for myself, such as my own operating agreement and privacy policy and those other important documents that you must have. I just simply redacted my name and have them available at any time at shopcreativelaw.com.
Wonderful. Those are some great opportunities. And of course, we'll have the links to both those businesses in the show notes. And again, Paige, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
And with that, we wrap another episode of the Successful Bookkeeper podcast. To learn more about today's wonderful guest and to get access to all sorts of valuable free business building resources, you can go to thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Until next time, goodbye.
You've been listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with Michael Palmer. For more information and to download the resources mentioned in this episode, please visit us at thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Thank you for listening.